Let me tell you a story about a pair of brothers, Andy and Dustin. They're like no others. They hit the road, traveling land, testing out food. Ain't that grand? From fast food joints to local dives, they're on a mission, taking crazy drives. They'll sample it all, junk food galore. But the question remains, what's worth fighting for? Southern DN'A, showing down Southern DN'A, exploring every town. They're on the hunt, searching far and wide for the flavors that'll make you satisfied. Let me tell you a story about a pair of brothers, Andy and Dustin. They're like no others. They hit the road, traveling land, testing out food. Ain't that grand? From fast food joints to local dives, they're on a mission, taking crazy drives. They'll sample it all, junk food galore. But the question remains, what's worth fighting for? Southern DN'A, they're chowing down Southern DN'A, exploring every town. They're on the hunt, searching far and wide for the flavors that'll make you satisfied. Southern DN'A, chowing down Southern DN'A, exploring every town. They're on the hunt, searching far and wide for the flavors that'll make you satisfied. Southern DN'A, chowing down Southern DN'A, exploring every town. They're on the hunt, searching far and wide for the flavors that'll make you satisfied. The flavors that'll make you satisfied. Southern DN'A, chowing down Southern DN'A, exploring every town. They're on the hunt, searching far and wide for the flavors that'll make you satisfied.
Well, what's going on? Happy Tuesday evening, technically speaking. I'm here with another Tuesday. I guess this is technically not really a Bible study today, but it's going to be talking about church business and how corrupt it has become. Um, and why we need to steer completely away from it, because it is the downfall, I do believe, of the real church. And when I mean that, I'm not talking about a body, I'm not talking about the building, I'm talking about a body of believers. We have stemmed so far away from that, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is how far we've stemmed from that, why we've stemmed from that, or why I believe we stem from that. Now, this doesn't apply to all churches. This is just this is just the overall, theme of churches out there. If your church doesn't sound like this, then you got a good body of believers, and you're doing it right. But I feel like this is a growing concern in today's body of believers. When we call even church, we're even talking about when we go to church. No, you're not going to church. You're going to a building with a bunch of other body of believers, and that is the church. You're going to meet with the body. When God tells us, when two or more are gathered, I will be there. And that could be at your home, or that could be at a restaurant. That could be anywhere. That could be out in a park. That could be anywhere. But today we say we're going to church. No, you're not going to church. You're going to a building with like-minded believers, or you're going to the temple. That's pretty much what you're going to. And we've disguised certain things where it makes us to me, I think it boils down to control. If we have control over the members of the body of believer, or the members of the church, then We can control their behaviors. And I'm not saying good or bad, but behaviors within that body of believers to make them behave a certain way that we like. And it's not good. And we got to steer away from that. We got to steer away from that, those controlling type buildings of people, or even people that's in charge of those places. And I think it's become a business. It's not no longer just a group of body believers gathering and learning about and teaching about Jesus and what he did for us. It's become a business of money, a business of pride, a business of control. And I think it stems to, when churches were started back in the day, and I say when bodies of believers come together, no one went to seminary schools. You read the book, you read the thing that it told us about who we're reading this all about, and whoever studied the most, whoever had the ability or the willingness to teach, they taught. But now, 9 times out of 10, if you go on, go on Indeed, go on LinkedIn, go on any place that you go, and if a place is looking for a pastor to come in, guess what? What are they looking for? They're looking for a seminary student, someone that has been trained by a school, a government-funded school, to teach you about Jesus. So they'll make you go take a 4 or an 8, however long it takes to get a master's or a doctorate in theology, and they send out for applicants for those type of people. Then that's all they'll look at. They won't look at a well-rounded, Bible-believing person that just has the willingness to teach people about Jesus. No, they want a very good-looking candidate that's on paper, that has been to all these seminaries, that's got a doctorate in theology, or divinity, or whatever they want to go by, and that's what they look at. They expect that person to have that full, degree. Why? What does that do? Other than the fact that you can be proud and boastful about the fact that you got some pastor with a doctorate or a master's in theology. That doesn't make that person a better teacher. That doesn't have that person have a better understanding of the Bible. All that does is that person is taught to preach and teach in a certain theology. That's it. It does the Bible no justice sending someone out to learn. If they're doing the justice of reading their Bible and studying the Bible every single day, preparing themselves for Sunday or Wednesday every week, that's a good preacher. A preacher that gets up on behind the pew or in front of, a couple of people, wherever you're having your local body of believers at, and they're teaching out of the Bible. That's what they're supposed to do. But no, we expect this, fancy dancy, pastor from theology school or Bible school, biblical, colleges to teach your local congregants. And I think that is where the business has pointed. You will not find hardly at all, if any at all, on LinkedIn or, wherever your job forms are right now, a pastor without a theology, or a church looking for a pastor without a theology degree. And that's just despicable, because that goes into the pride. You want somebody that has this fancy diploma, which nowhere in the Bible tells us that you have to go get a degree to teach about the Bible. No, in fact, it is the qualifications of a pastor has nothing about that. The one thing it does talk about is a willingness to teach. That's it. As far as the studies go, that they need to have a willingness to do it, and that you should know why you know what you know. That's the bottom line. No college is going to be better off teaching you than the Bible itself. The Bible itself has everything you need to know. But churches, body of believers, buildings, deacons want this fancy suit dressed, nice dressed looking person that has that nice, college degree on their wall so they can say, well, we got so and so, Dr. so and so preaching here. It doesn't make for a good pastor, whether they have it or not. It doesn't make for a biblical pastor to have it or not. But churches have gone this way. And it's because we've allowed this business to start growing within the body of believers that's focused inwardly instead of outwardly, like we're supposed to be. And they're worried about the image. They're worried about the money. They're worried about, well, if we get this doctoral, this doctrinal sound preacher from, or not even doctrinal sound, but this preacher from, this big fancy school, we're going to bring in the numbers. And if they bring in the numbers, we're going to be able to spend more money on all these things that we want to spend money on. And that's not what we're here for. I never seen in the Bible once yet where Jesus says, go out and build more buildings in my name. No, he says, go make disciples. Go out, make disciples and baptize. He never says, go out and spend more money on buildings. And that's where we've gotten into, where the church wants to spend money on the church, the building. Not the members of the body believers. They want to spend money on the building itself. Big fancy buildings that they're in. And it starts becoming where they will structure themselves to make sure they can continue to do it. So we start seeing power-hungry families within these body believers positioning themselves where they can make sure that money is safeguarded. It doesn't go out where it's supposed to be going out to. It's being secured and safe within that body of believers, or really the board of directors of the deacons, or the secretaries, or even the pastors themselves. They position themselves perfectly within them families where they can have a pastor, a deacon, or a pastor, deacon, secretary, and they make sure they communicate within each other. Hey, make sure we don't spend this much money on this thing, or they don't spend. And it's all about money coming in. It's all about never going out. And you're saying, well, how do you know this? Because I've been in that position before. I've been in the position where I've had to see the back parts of these churches. And what I've seen is when a church gets bigger, always, I've never seen it where it's been anything like this, but it always becomes corrupt. When a church is smaller, there's less likelihood for it to be corrupt. But as it gets bigger, it starts to corrupt. Because you start getting people in that want to position themselves in certain places. It's not about the gospel anymore. It's about power. And they start placing themselves there. I've been in churches where money was just a necessity of making sure the bills were paid and funding the activities and giving out to where it needs to go. I've been given, okay, you have a budget for your youth. This is your budget. You need to stay within this budget. So what the church as a whole, the body of believers, agreed that you should spend this year. And they gave me a debit card with that money in that bank. And I would spend that money from that debit card. And then I've been in churches, like the last one I was just a part of, where I had to basically beg to get money that was already allotted to the youth. I would have begged to get a debit card. I'd beg to, borrow it, because they wouldn't never give me one because I wasn't part of the inner circle. Although I was hired on to be the youth pastor, I wasn't part of that inner circle. They were afraid that I would spend too much money, I guess, on the youth, that they wouldn't give me a debit card. So I'd have to beg to get a debit card just to spend money on certain activities and stuff. So what would I do? I would just take the money that they paid me and I would spend that money instead of having to beg for the money that was already allotted to the youth department. And they said, well, if you use your own money, just let us know and we'll reimburse you. I don't have thousands of dollars in my account to, just do that kind of stuff. So I would just, sometimes I wouldn't even tell them because it was just a hassle. I think I still got somewhere a check stub. I still got a check stub from that church where they reimbursed me basically for what I had to spend because, again, they wouldn't let me have a debit card. They just said, here, if you need something, you can either, ask for a debit card, borrow one, and then give it back when you're done, or you can spend your own money, which was, I would just use whatever they allotted. They paid me a month and I would just use it instead. And then it wasn't, see, that's the thing. It wasn't even about the money. Me getting paid wasn't about the money. So I would use that sometimes and I would pay whatever needs to be paid. And I still got checks. I think I still got a check somewhere, an uncashed check where they reimbursed me. And it's not about that. It's just the point. It's just the point that I had to use money that you're already paying me as a youth pastor to spend because you were too greedy enough where you did not feel like I needed to be in charge of the youth budget. They wanted to make sure they were in control every little way they went. And that's a bad church. That's a bad system. A system that's only worried about the money other than the why we got it for in the first place. It's part of the money-hungry families that are moving and making sure they got, in the right position so they can control the real thing that they're really worried about is the money. They're not worried about the congregants. They're worried about the money. And when you get like that, guess what? Money gets preached on more than the gospel does. I think someone said that, at one time, tithes was preached on like once in like 16 sermons or something like that. But because churches get bigger, they have to start preaching on once out of 8 sermons or once out of 4 sermons. They have to start throwing in there. But guess what? The whole tithe system in general is an Old Testament thing. It's not a commandment unto the New Testament or to the church itself. It's an Old Testament. And I've heard preachers talk about that, even ones that admit to that fact, that it's an Old Testament commandment. They'll say, well, I'd hate to think Old Testament Jews give more money than New Testament Christians. How do they even know how much you're giving anyways? I know when I go to every grocery store or food place, there's always some kind of charity asking me for money, and you hit yes. They guilt you into it no matter what, but you're giving a portion everywhere you go. At points, it's hundreds of dollars at the end of the month because you went to all these places and you're hitting yes. Do they account for that? Because you're giving? No. They only account for the 10% that they allot that you're giving unto the body of believers or the building itself. That's where they account that 10%. And let's break down that 10% anyways. It wasn't about cash. It was 10% of goods, food, clothing, whatever you produced to bring into the stockpile. For what reason? To give out to the people that needed it. And too many churches out there today are just bringing in money and hardly any of it goes out. Hardly any of it. If you broke down the budget, and I mean the real budget of these churches, how much money is being give out? Because it should be almost a one-to-one comparison. Once all the expenditures are done, why is the money still sitting in the bank account at the end of the year? And they usually say, what's a rainy day fund? Well, for some families within the church, it's been flooding. It's flooding right now. I mean, the rain has poured. They're drowning. And you got the deacons in the back thumbing through the bills. They're not giving it back out. They're just they're hoarding. They're taking it in. They're taking it in. They're taking it in, and they'll never give it back out because they're worried about, well, we'd love to have another building, or we'd love to have another place, or we'd love to repave this. We'd love to do this, this, and this. And there's people in their own congregants that are drowning right now. And they've asked, they've even begged to do things for the church to get paid. And when it comes to get paid, it's scraps. It's not, they're not getting paid the worth of the job that's being done. And that's where we're at in these churches that are all focused on the money, all focused on the power. They worry about the money coming in more than worry about the people in the building. And they all tied up in a nice little bow at the end of the year. And this is what blew my mind. When I was in my first position as a youth pastor, our end of the year budget was pretty much black and white. You had every number broke down. This is all the places that we're spending money on, all the salaries that we got, which was 2 salaries. You know, the loan that we were paying, I mean, it was broke down black and white. The allotment for, ministries were all separated. You had the children's ministry, you had the youth ministry, and that was really, other than that, we had an outreach. That was, I think, was the last one that we had. And everything was broken down, nice, black and white, pretty as a picture. So if anybody had questions about where every cent went in that church, it was there, black and white. And we could vote on every single thing that we wanted to go through there to make sure that everything was agreed on by the body of the believers, how everything was to be spent that year. Fast forward to the last place I was at. Everything was just lumped together. This is the budget. This is what this is about the number that we're spending for a lot of the stuff. It would be like, okay, there's the ministries. This is what we're spending on all the ministries. This is the salaries we're spending on. And there's other expenses that's in this also. They'll have an other expenses. We don't know what those expenses are, but there's other expenses listed on there also. And you would just vote on that budget. Couldn't ask questions about what's in those other expenditures. We couldn't ask questions about, what's here and what's there. No. If you like this budget, we'll vote on this budget. It'll pass. If you don't like it, we say no, it won't pass. There was no black and whiteness to it. There was colorful pictures. There was pie charts. There were numbers that, looked interesting and fancy, but it was never broken down point to point. Why do they do that? Because they don't want you to see what the real numbers are. I got to see the back end of it, which was even more surprising for me, that, they basically, the deacons would vote on how much they would approve the increase of the pay of the pastors, and they would vote on basically all the budgets, and then it would get sent to the congregants, and they get just to vote on like one big package. They wouldn't even, it's basically like, Nancy Pelosi, well, we got to vote it in before we actually know what's in there. That's basically how they treated it. And it's deceiving. It's deceiving to the congregants because they just see a bunch of numbers, or some of them don't even care. They're just seeing these pretty numbers, and they see these pretty pictures, and they're like, oh, this looks good. This looks fine. And at the end of the day, they don't spend any money, or they don't question it, and they vote on yes. And then when, 6 months come down the road and there's things being spent on, they're like, wait a minute, did I vote on this? Yeah, you did, because you didn't know that you were voting on it. And that's how they wrap these up. They put all these beautiful pictures up on their slideshows and stuff about all the things they did throughout the year. They, bought thousands of dollars worth of candy for the trunk or treat, and they spent thousands of dollars on VBS for all these prizes for these kids that they haven't seen since VBS. And it looks all great. It looks all perfect. So that gets you to say yes during that budget meeting instead of questioning what's in that budget. And that's deceitful. That's what's going on within the buildings, or what we call church. It's deceiving the members of the body. Why? Because they're more worried about that money coming in. They're setting up churches like businesses instead of family. We were never meant to be a business. I remember Jesus going into the temple and where they were treating the temple like a business. And what did he do? He started overthrowing tables and whipping them out of the temple. Lord, help them come into these temples today and see what the money-hungry deacons and the pastors and all this other, the secretaries and everybody else that's in charge of this stuff, what they're doing to his temple. He'd run them out of town. They're treating the temple exactly like the Pharisees were treating the temple back in the day. They're wrapping it up in a nice little bow at the end of the year budget meetings. And there's no faith whatsoever. A real true body of believers would trust the Lord to provide to get them through. I think it was the founder of a big college up there, the big college of in Virginia, a Christian college. He went and fasted. I think it was like end up being altogether, I think it was like 60 or 90 days altogether. It had no money when he did this. He went to a random like part of the fields, sat down, and he prayed and he fasted for the Lord to provide to set up a college right there. And the Lord provided. But churches now today, the body of believers, when they go to these buildings, these corporations, these businesses that have been set up, we treat them like business. They are businesses now. But their board of directors, there's, the CEO, the pastor. We treat them just like business, so might as well call them what they are. But they hoard in the money. They hoard it in. Like I said, families right now are dying or struggling to survive, especially with the price of everything that's gone up this year and last year and the year before last. Prices keep on going up, and churches are hoarding this money in. And they call it a rainy day fund. Well, it's pouring outside. The church should be providing, and the church, when you boil it down to, if they had faith that the Lord provide, would go 1 for 1 with their budget. We took in all this money. All the expenditures are paid off. Let's send it back out unto the people that's in our area. And I've been to churches where they have overseas missions. Then they got big, beautiful boards saying this is all the missions that we support, but they've never hardly have met the person that they're funding. And while they're doing this, people in their community are starving. That's the mission you should be funding. Send that money out to them. Stop hoarding it. If you really trust in the Lord, you would use your own words that you use on the congregants. There's pastors out there today. You can go on YouTube, TikTok, and type it in, that they say the reason why you're sick or the reason why you can't get healed is because maybe you're too stingy with your tithe. What? Well, maybe the reason why your church is dead is because you're too stingy with that tithe. Maybe because the people out there in the area sees you as exactly what you are. A pit of vipers. A building of dry bones that are just dead. That's not going to be awoken because you're too busy looking inward. And that's got to stop. We need to get back to the Old Testament church, the one that it describes here in this Bible. We need to stop treating church like a business. We need to stop hoarding in all this money and worrying about the pridefulness of who is in charge of the local body of believers. Guess what? It's God. It's not some guy named Joe. Get this out of your mind right now. Your pastor, he's not special. He's not God. He's not the second coming of Christ. He's just some average person that was given the gift to have the willingness to preach you. Some are better than others. Some can talk better than others. But they all have the same gift, the willingness to teach. That's it. But y'all are treating these people like they're gods. They're not. They're just your brother in Christ. And you're uplifting these people like they're the second coming of Christ. They're not. So let's treat them like they are, who they are. They're just another brother. And they've got the role, they've got the duty, the responsibility given to God to teach y'all. That's it. They're not going to get you into heaven. They can't pray you into heaven. They can't even heal you. They can pray for your healing, but they can't heal you physically. Stop treating like they're the second coming of Christ. They're not. They're just another person trying to get through this life and do what we're supposed to be doing. Teaching, preaching, and baptizing. Making disciples. Not of me, not of them, but of God. That's what we're supposed to be doing here on this earth. I think if money was so important to Jesus that he would have set up the church in a money laundering way, or money not laundering, but a money business, like basically a business. He would set up, okay, this is how you need to do with your money. But all it says in the Bible, what about money? Now they've twisted this throughout the years too, and thankfully someone looked in the Bible and said, wait a minute, this is not what this says. It says, they would teach on money is the root of all evil. That's not exactly true. The love of money, which is what the business of church is doing now, is the root of all evil. They would use the money is all evil, so they would help, make you tithe that money that you have. But that's not true. The love of money is the root of all evil. Well, guess what? Hate to say it, but it's true. Churches love money. We used to be in the people business, making disciples. Now we're in the money business. We got to stop that. We got to get back to the Old Testament church if we're wanting to make a difference in this world. We got to get away from that nonsense. All right, guys. Hope y'all enjoyed what I had to say about the bloatedness of the church and how it needs to change. I know this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and everybody's not going to like it. There's going to be a lot of people not happy with what I said there, but it's got to be called out. It's got to be told to people, hey, this is going on. And even in the local churches, not just the multi-million-dollar ones, it's going on. When churches become too big, they always get corrupted. It's just the way it goes. I mean, I've not seen one yet to speak the other way around. And if you find one, please show me. I'm willing to look. But I guarantee if you boil it down, you break it down, there's some corruption within that church. The best church that you're going to find is a local body of believers. That's what church is. That's small. Maybe they're meeting in their home. Maybe they're meeting at a Denny's, or we don't have Denny's around here. Well, it could be where you're at, or an IHOP, or a Cracker Barrel, or maybe they're meeting in someone else's home. I don't know, but maybe it's a small country church out there, somewhere that's a small building of local believers that have gotten together, and this just a few of them. But they're doing exactly what they're being told, and money is not what they're focused on. They're focused on growing spiritually with one another and learning and teaching and making disciples. I hope this has opened some people's eyes. And again, this is not a determinant that you should not go to a local body of believers. I actually think you should find, a small one and gather with a small group of people, whether it's in a home. I think that's better off for you, where it's not focused on the stupid things of money. It's focused on Jesus. This ain't, like I said, this ain't a determinant of you to meet with other Christians. This is a determinant of the business of what church has become. It's got to get away from that. Again, there's a lot of churches that are going to be really mad at me saying this. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. If you can prove to me that it's not about the money, I'm all ears. If you can prove to me it's not all about the numbers, again, I'm all ears. But until then, I'm going to still teach on the evilness of the business practice that's become what we know today of church. Church was never meant to be a business. It was meant to be a family. And we need to get back to that. We need to become a family once again. Stop worrying about that money. The love of it that a lot of the churches have become, that have went towards. They've loved that money coming in, and they love to preach on it. They love to teach on it. Let's get back to that family atmosphere that we should be having as a church. So with that, I hope you have a good day. I will catch y'all on Friday for my normal Friday. Well, and also, happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. You get 3 live streams from me this week. It's a busy week for me, but you get 3 from me. Andy will be with me on here on Saturday, and we'll have a gaming stream on Friday. So you'll get 3 streams this week, and I'll be back with you again on Friday. Until then, I'll catch you next time, and I hope you have a blessed day.